Hello, I'm Karen Cherry Brown, and welcome to another episode of Prevailing Through Pain, where extraordinary women tell their stories. And today we have the amazing Angel Carroll, former educator, community organizer, and now running for state representative. Hi, Angel, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Angel, this is an exciting time in your life. And so I'd like to go back just a little bit and talk about earlier years. And because I say for me as a child, I never thought about being a politician, being into politics. So most of us as children don't think about, oh, when I grow up, I want to be a politician, especially if we didn't have that as a part of our life. So let's talk about your earlier years and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I like to first start out by saying I'm an advocate that is entering into the political realm.
Okay.
My story starts quite literally when we talk about the school to prison pipeline. So a lot of folks don't understand or know that you can be sentenced as an adult in the Texas prison system at age 10.
Really?
And so, yeah. So that's where my story starts. I was first detained in my juvenile detention facility at age 11. So,
Okay, how did you get to that?
so I was one of those kids that acted out in school.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, at that time, there wasn't a lot of training on being trauma informed and realizing that when kids are acting out, oftentimes there's something going on at home. For me, it was physical and emotional abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how my trauma played out. And so when I believe I was in middle school, it was middle school at the time, I just decided I had had enough and decided I was going to go home. And so I put my headphones in and I walked off campus and I had a school resource officer come up from behind me and grab my shoulder. Now, what we know about trauma is fight or flight. I wasn't thinking about who's behind me, let me ask questions. All I knew was that there was a man's hand on my shoulder. So I fought. I tried to protect myself. And it was the officer, and I was being faced with assault against a public servant and facing 2 to 4 years in prison.
And you're 10 years old?
I was a little older at this point, but had been shuffled in for multiple different reasons at this point.
But wait, we're saying a grown man put his hand on your shoulder, and you're like,
Protecting myself,
protecting
doing what
yourself.
I'm thinking is protecting myself.
and now you're getting thrown into the system.
Fortunate for me, I had an attorney ad litem and judge who were able to get into what was going on at home. And I was able to be a part of a diversion program. But what's really important about that piece is that it quite literally changed the trajectory of my life. Had I been convicted, I would have been placed in an adult prison. What we know about youth that go into these facilities, they're 85% more likely to be sexually assaulted. I likely would have caught another charge while incarcerated. And if and when I got out, it would have been nearly impossible for me to find housing, a job. If I decided that I wanted to go to college, I wouldn't be able to obtain financial aid. So these are the things that happen when we incarcerate our youth. And so my freshman year in high school, my mother, who rightfully suffered through her own mental health challenges, it was during the Great Recession, she decided she no longer wanted me. And so I was placed in in the foster care system. And so that first year, I was in 12 different group homes across the state, from far west Texas to South Texas, all over. I never stayed in one place very long. And ultimately, the state didn't have any adequate homes for me. And so I was placed in what doubled as a youth prison when the Texas Youth Commission was still active.
And how old were you at this time?
I believe I was 16 or 17 at that time. So there are a lot of abuses that went on in that facility, far more than those that I experienced at home. Sexual abuse, physical abuse. They were trafficking some girls. It was a really horrific scene. Fortunately enough, I was able to call my attorney and social worker at a time where it wasn't being supervised, because they were supervising literally everything, even those calls that they weren't supposed to. And had gathered enough proof for them to believe me.
And you were smart enough to do all this at an early age like that.
I mean, it was survival. It really was. And I'll never forget, there was a prayer that I prayed a couple nights before that actually happened. And I said, Lord, if you get me out of this situation, I'll do whatever you want me to do. If I can just get out of here, I will make sure that the story of those around me and my own are told. I'll do whatever you want.
Yeah. You know, that gives me chills because uh, being in situations myself in life, and my prayer was, Lord, if you help me to get through this for the rest of my life, I'll make sure that I'm that person to help other people. So girl, that just brought me chills because
It's true. Yeah.
yeah.
When you're in that situation, what more can you do than just pray?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my prayer. I got out. At that point, I had moved around so much. I was a third-time freshman. So got placed in an emergency shelter in New Braunfels, Texas, and applied for credit by exam. And I went from being 3 years behind to credit by exam and actually graduated 6 months earlier than I would have initially graduated.
Wow.
And I was really proud of myself.
You should have been.
Yeah. I had a lot of folks telling me you can't do anything. I'll never forget I had a teacher, a college prep teacher at middle school that told me, she was talking about my behavior. And she said, you're just going to be like all those other girls on your side of town. You're going to get pregnant by 16. You're not going to amount to anything. And that's always stayed with me. In fact, I wrote her a letter years later about how her words impacted me.
Good for you.
And that I was letting
did she
it go.
respond back?
She did not respond back.
But good for you.
Yeah.
I had a ninth grade teacher. It was for me because like our age difference, where you're talking about prep, college prep, we didn't know it. They didn't even talk to us about college when I was in middle school or even high school. Those that were going to college, it was because they had scholarships. Our parents couldn't afford that. But I remember my ninth grade teacher. I did pretty good in regular math. And going into ninth grade, algebra was what we needed to take. And I remember saying, what is this? These are letters. And he said, you're absolutely right. That's something that you'll never be able to use algebra because you'll never be able to get a job, that you're going to go any further. And so he transferred me to a basic math class. And I'm a kid, and I'm thinking, well, good, I do good in math. But years later, I resented him for that because I thought as an adult, that was his responsibility to make me challenge myself. But he was like so glad to get rid of me. Well, good, get out. And yeah. And so, and I think about things like that. If I had gone back and talked to those people and said, because someone else that could have impacted them in a different way where they even dropped out of school. So, okay, so now you got out, you graduated earlier than you would have.
I graduated earlier than I would have, started at the local community college and went on to study social work at that time at Texas Tech University. And it was while there I started getting into the outcomes and the data around foster care youth. And so it was there that I realized a third went to prison, another third were homeless, but no one knew what happened to the other third. And everyone kept telling me, Angel, you're an outlier. You're an outlier. And they were right, but it upset me that I was an outlier because I knew at that point, just the kind of child that I was, I was empowered and focused based off of what people told me I couldn't do. I was going to prove you wrong. Right? Like, there's nothing better than,
I know.
You said I couldn't do this? Okay, let me show you that I can do it. And so I didn't know really at that point what I could do. I just knew that I had to start talking about this issue. So I started just showing up to the state capitol during the legislative sessions. What better way to get involved in democracy and change than going to the people's house? And so it was there where I started running into some of my juvenile judges and juvenile probation officers. And in the summers, I would come back and I would mentor girls that were being detained. I would help do trainings on the importance of being trauma informed in Williamson County, And there was an opportunity to testify before the Texas Supreme Court and Criminal Court of Appeals about my experience, particularly when thinking about dual status youth. So a dual status youth is someone that's in the foster care system and the juvenile justice system. It's a very specific group of kids that we often don't talk about, but they're so intertwined. Again, there were times when I was in Bruceville Eddy just outside of, Temple and Waco. And, a facility would say, we no longer want her here. So I would be put in a juvenile detention facility outside of Mejia or Lubbock, right? Like, this is what we're doing to our youth. And so it was there where I talked about being over-medicated, abused, and they ended up, along with my testimony and other stakeholders across the state, they established the Judicial Commission on Mental Health. And so it's a collaborative of rural, urban stakeholders, judges, officers, really to talk about mental health in the state and getting folks the resources that they need and bridging that gap. And so I've been on their collaborative council for the last 5 years. Would return again. I talked about coming back to Williamson County where I was harmed by their systems of oppression and helped design an alternative to incarceration program that actually was mirrored here in Dallas as well. And what that did was it took 17 to 24-year-olds out of the criminal justice system that were facing felonies and got them and their families the help that they needed so that they could avoid going through the system. And from there, the governor actually recognized my work, and I became one of the youngest governor appointees at just 23 years old to the Texas Juvenile Justice Advisory Board. And so it was an amazing opportunity. I'll never forget, I was flying back to Austin for a meeting, and there was a gentleman who had also been appointed, and he said, well, how did you get on the board? So I was like, well, I was put in a youth prison, not because I'd been convicted of a crime, but because there were no homes for me. And I asked him the same, and his story was I was having dinner with my dad's friend and said I wanted to work in the government and do something, and that's how his name got in the hat. And it just amplified what I already knew.
So elaborate on that.
That someone like me in my background, let's just take a further step. A Black woman, I had to go through pain to have and to be considered someone with expertise in this space.
And so this young man,
he just happened to have dinner with his dad's work buddy, and they threw his name in the hat.
Is back in the day they used to say he lived on the right side of the tracks.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. But that told me that I was where I needed to be. That I had a seat at the table. Right? Years ago, I had prayed that prayer, and God gave me that seat. But now that I have that seat at the table, what do I do? Was I going to use my voice? And I have. And finally graduated college. I mean, I did that all as an undergrad. So I was very busy. And when I graduated, I returned to Williamson County, started working for that program that I helped design. And then the pandemic happened. So unfortunately, I lost my job. And as I continued to show up, to the legislative sessions and different meetings, I got really frustrated with the fact that we have people making decisions about systems they've never been involved in. Not only directly, but even, have you worked in these facilities? No, that's dangerous. So I had this amazing opportunity. I had 2 jobs that God placed before me, and I took both of them. It's a little crazy, but I did it. It was a step of faith. And I came on board for a Black woman-led research organization, turning research into policy. And then I had an opportunity to teach in the DC jail. And it was the most amazing experience ever. I believe everyone's better than the worst thing that they've ever done. And to see how education can serve as a catalyst for economic prosperity.
So you said everybody's better than the worst thing they've ever done. I like that.
They really are. And so that's what's guided me through this process. It really has. And DC was an amazing experience. I loved my guys. I honestly, I didn't care what they did. It wasn't my place to judge. It was my place to not only educate them, but to show them grace.
So there were predominantly males that you worked with?
Predominantly males. It was in the Federal Bureau of Prisons in DC. So
how do you feel that was received from them with you being a woman as far as working with them? And a young woman at that.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, in our prison system, education is a privilege, not a right. So they were really respectful.
Oh, good.
Yeah. go in and play spades. You have to build trust, right? So
Look, spades and dominoes. Let's go get
spades
it
will
every
bring
time.
people together. And then I remember one of the units were predominantly, they had some Spanish speakers, and they loved that I was from Texas. I was Senorita Tejas and loved it. And that was a really interesting perspective as well that brought, because in Texas, most of your residents, so we call them residents in DC, and that's the language that I prefer compared to inmate. So in Texas, most of your residents are going to be Black and African American and Hispanic, whereas your officers are going to be white. Well, in DC, your residents were primarily Black, but then also your officers were African American and African.
Okay.
So it was an interesting dynamic that you saw in those facilities. But like I said, I loved it. It was amazing. I taught them career and professional development. So I taught the guys on the inside, the guys that were returning home. And it gave me a really great perspective on the struggles and challenges that folks face when they're trying to reintegrate and back into society. When a man will tell you, I'd rather go back and finish my time in the feds because, I finally got a job, but I work in a warehouse. I can't have my phone, but now my PO is telling me I need to go do a drug test in the next hour, but I don't have public transportation, or I don't have my own transportation, so I have to take public transportation, and it's nearly impossible. I mean, these are the things that we're setting these folks up for failure, and it's not okay. It's not okay.
I've never personally, experienced any time, I guess, while I was confined. I do have a brother baby brother that struggles with drugs, and so he's been in and out of the system and in homes, and I mean he's in his 50s now, and still, I can't even imagine a younger person that's their beginning of the world.
Yeah.
And to hear someone tell a story, such as yourself, that you turn that what could have been a negative situation into a positive situation. And not only did you pull yourself up, but you continue to reach back to pull up others. And I applaud you for that. Because unfortunately, sometimes we forget, when we're able to get our head above water, we forget that we were drowning at one point in time in our life. And even though that wasn't my story as far as, being in the system or not being in the system, because there were people that were able to help me, it was just situations in life that I found myself in, but it was from low self-esteem with me, and just trying to find, someone to love me, someone to believe in me, and learning that I had to love me first. I had to believe in me first, because all that false, people will tell you what you want to hear.
Yeah.
And I'm embarrassed to say this, but I've been watching All the Queen's Men.
Oh, that's on my list. I
I've
haven't
been
gotten there
watching
yet.
All the Queen's Men. And I always try to get something out of whatever I'm looking at, not just to be looking at it, but it was a situation where there's one of the guys that had gotten in trouble earlier when he was 19. So he was put into, he was in this, got a penitentiary, was in this halfway house. And it was just, even all the corruption that was in it. And so trying to struggle through that, where when you said the urine, take the urine test, it was like they were trying to set him up.
Yeah.
To get money, to put him back in the system. And, and even though that was television, I know a lot of these, it's off of reality. And so let's talk about a little bit about the company that you work for now. You said the African American
Yes.
owned company.
So we're called Measure. We're a Black woman-led research organization. And I have to say again, Black woman-led research organization. It has been the most healing process for me, to be completely honest. We have about 4 anti-racist evaluation tools that we use. We use these tools with foundations, academic institutions, and nonprofits, and then we provide that service free of charge to Black, Brown, and Indigenous-led organizations giving back to the community. My role is to help turn that research into policy with the community in mind. So that means we have community data gatherings where we say, okay, this organization has used our tool. Let's get the community's feedback. It's been, maybe a year, a couple months. Let's see what they've been doing since then and continued the evaluation process. One of the things that we focused on a couple years ago was hair discrimination.
Mm.
That's huge, especially for, Black folks. Our hair, our crown is so important to us, and it's been weaponized for years. And so we worked with the city of Austin and the city of Pflugerville to get their Crown Act passed. And in this last legislative session, I worked with Rep. Retta Bowers out of Garland.
Wow.
And we saw that pass this last legislative session, which is huge.
So, what I was telling you, I feel like as much as we've changed, we haven't. So I'm going to go back to, God, it had to be 19 something, 80s. Was it? Probably in the 80s. And I was living in California, of all places. I was in a school for dental assistant, right? And our bylaws said that our hair had to be neat and above our shoulders. And so I could barely afford to buy the hair to get the hair braided into my hair. But I scraped up my little change, bought this hair, and out of all people, my ex-husband braided my hair because I couldn't even afford to go to the shop. It took us about 12 hours to get my hair braided, right?
Wow.
And so I was so proud of my new hairstyle. I showed up Monday. My hair was pulled back, and we had to wear those white nursing caps at the time, so my hair was pulled back. And I had my little nursing cap on, and I go to class, and I'm sitting in class. I get called to the office. They said that I couldn't go back to class until I took that out of my hair. You can't, so I said, it says your hair to be neat and above your shoulders. So all the blondes in the class, their hair was pulled back up under the cap. And I said, no, it took us forever. And I spent my last little change on doing that. And so the next day, I'm a rebel. The next day, I go to a Goodwill.
Okay.
I found this blonde wig.
No, she did.
Yes. And the wig looked like it was on the back of somebody's head, blew off of a truck, and then a car came behind it and drove over it, and then somebody picked it up, and then they put it in mud. That's how horrible this wig looked. So I put this wig on my head when I get into school. I go in the bathroom, put this wig on my head. My hair's up under the wig. And then I put the cap on my head and I go sit in class like this. So my instructor's trying to teach, and then he's so distracted. He walks out and he comes back and he says, you need to go to the office. So I go to the office and they said, what is that ridiculous thing on your head? I said, well, I thought this is what you want me to look like.
Well.
And so they said, Karen, take that off of your head and go back to class. And so I was able to keep my hair braided, but still to go through all that. But we're going to take a commercial break and we'll be right back.
This lady can't be stopped. She just can't be stopped. She gets ideas and goes with it and follows through and knows the connections, knows what to do. And I'm really so impressed with her beyond what I knew her as, that it's really remarkable. It's really remarkable what she's made of herself.
Those in the know SIPS Consults. SIPS Consults is hiring. Confident, competent, and consistent. Starting as a consultant and a volunteer, SIPS has grown into a dynamic group of stellar sterile processing professionals, offering excellent benefits, 401k, and consultant in training program. We are hiring certified technicians, leads, supervisors, interim managers, educators, coordinators. Apply at recruiting@sipsconsults.com or dial 1-866-615-7977.
All right, and we're back. Angel, let's talk a little bit more about rocking this crown.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that story. Unfortunately, there's so many Black women and girls who have the same story. I remember in middle school, I was forced to actually cut my braids in school because they were distracting.
So was it a teacher or?
It was the school system. It was against
Wow.
the dress code policy. And, you know,
They were distracting.
They were distracting.
Distracting who? Because I remember sitting in class, and this was what was distracting to me. Someone sitting there brushing all their hair and then throwing it back in my face.
yeah,
But your hair was
my hair was
distracting.
distracting. And to be told that my hair is distracting and unprofessional, I mean, that early of an age, just we know how that affects us going into adulthood. And so the passage of the Crown Act was really important. I mean, they're still fighting it. I'm still working. I got a text this morning from some folks with the National NAACP and ACLU because of, you know, Barber Hills ISD and South Texas. But I'm committed to continuing to fight that because we know how important it is. And why can't we just show up authentically and be great?
Exactly.
You know?
Because we are.
Because that we are.
Why can't we be who we are and it be accepted?
And
right?
it be accepted. You know, if I got the job because of the merits of my character, why should my hair matter?
Wow. I remember when I first started my company, I would go to interview
Okay.
with the client, and I remember eyes going every which way because I had natural hair.
Mm.
And so the person that used to color my hair, because I've always liked coloring my hair, she made me a wig with the same colors as my natural hair. So I started wearing that wig when I would go to interview with a client. Contracts would get signed off.
Mm.
They didn't know I actually owned the company, but they thought that, you know, I was one of the company executives. So they were okay with that. They'd sign off. And then I would show up with my natural hair. And they'd say, "Oh, you've changed your hair." And I would say, "And it will look different next time you see me." But I thought it was, you know, it was more important to me at the time, though, because I was starting a new company and I had all of these people that depended on me that were signed up to work for the company.
Yeah.
And it was more important to me at the time to put this disguise on, to go in there, to get the contract. And then, you know, the natural me came out. We're 18, 19 years later with the company. But even with that, you know, listening to where we are today, still talking about signing the crown, it's just
ridiculous.
It's just disheartening.
Well, I'll even tell you this. So when we met with the committee this last legislative session last year, we were scheduled, you know, they say show up at this time and, you know, you'll be heard. The committee convened at 8 a.m. We did not get heard till about 10:30, 11 p.m. They did all the gaming bills first. And then, you know, it had dwindled down by the amount of advocates and folks that were still there. And then we got question and grill on what is hair texture? What is hairstyle? Does this really happen? There's no way this is an issue. I mean, they were committee members who voted no for the Crown Act. And then later in the year, when they were in their fourth special session talking about school vouchers and that scam, one of the representatives said, "Well, we passed the Crown Act. We gave that to you. You should be grateful for it." I mean, that's why I'm running. I'm no longer willing to accept the status
That you should
quo.
be grateful.
That we should be grateful while we're still fighting school districts that don't want to.
For being allowed to look like
How we
we were born to
look like. Yeah. While we're still fighting, even though it's past September 1st, later that week, Barber Hills ISD, they suspended a young man. There's no reason why he's been in out-of-school suspension because of his hair. Still, a blatant disregard for Texas law. That's why we need more working class folks in office, why we need more people of color and Black folks in office who are willing to speak the truth. I'm no longer willing to ask allies to fight for us. No one can fight for us like we can fight for us.
Fight for ourselves.
Sure can.
So let's talk about the fight, though. So we get in these offices,
Yes.
and then there comes election time.
Yes. Oh, the election.
So how do we encourage more people that look like us to get out and vote? I'm asking this because, I mean, I'm up for re-election again this year.
Yeah.
But as far as younger people, is there something that you can recommend, something that you do to try to get younger people involved with voting?
I say actively engage us. And I say us as a 28-year-old that's running for office, right? Don't just come around in the primaries and in the general when you need our votes. Are you actively engaging us in this process? And not just to get out and vote for you, right? But letting your voice be heard. Are you accessible? I know I want someone in office who is going to be outspoken and tell the truth. I'm tired of feeling lied to, if I'm completely honest. And as I'm talking to voters, and especially young voters, they want someone who's willing to say enough, right? And say, yeah, the system is broken, but we can continue to fix it with each other. And that's where I've seen the most success in being
great.
honest.
And I do agree with that. I remember when I decided that I was going to run for city council, and I mean, I was busy building a company all these years, so I would come through because I'm almost on 2 acres, come through my gate and come in my, and then I'm back out to the airport and, back up in there. But as I got more involved in the city and saw challenges, I mean, I'm one of those people that can afford to have an attorney on retainer, but that's not everyone's story. So whenever I would go in front of, our council or our boards even for things, it was all of this red tape that I noticed other people didn't necessarily have to go through. But again, I had attorneys that looked over everything, so I's were dotted, T's were crossed. And in the end, I was approved for things, but it was always a stipulation with that. And so starting to get more involved, going to look at how the difference in I felt people were treated. My grandmother raised me to say that if there was something that you didn't like, don't sit around and complain about it. Be about it. Do something about it.
Do something about it.
So I got involved. And to be honest, still really not prior to that, before getting really involved, not realizing that the city, the local, our local elections are just as important, where we all say, well, when it's time to vote for the president, I'm going to get out and vote for whichever president, the majority of the people look like they're talking about. No, read about these people. Don't just vote for them because the majority of the people are for them. But
go down the ballot.
Go down the ballot. Exactly.
School boards, right? Something's going on in your school district, school boards, local government, even state representatives. I was talking to a group of high schoolers this last summer, and they were like, Miss Carroll, how do we get involved? Like, we want to go to college. We want to get involved in this process. What should we study? What club should we join? That doesn't matter. Show up.
Show up.
Show up authentically, how you are and who you are, and let your voice be heard. I started showing up as an undergraduate to the state capitol, and you can sign up as a community member to testify. That is our right, and we should show up. I think that's how the process starts. That's democracy. That's the country that we live in. Because if you believe folks that have hateful ideologies don't show up to the state capitol, oh, they do. I've seen them. And there are parts of this process where they have something at the Capitol called dropping cards. So as bills move through the committee, it gets to a point where it's going up to Calendar's committee to get on the House floor. I have stopped bills by dropping cards saying no to bills because people aren't doing that piece. And that's what I love about my job at Measure, because it's not enough for us as advocates to do the work. We have to get the community involved. Yeah. It can't just be us. Yeah. And I refuse for it just to be us.
And you're right. I was saying when I decided to run, I mean, my knuckles were sore because I said, I don't want to just be a name on the ballot. I want people to know who I am. And I got out and I knocked on so many doors. And one thing where I felt it was good for me, I felt it was a win-win for me. And I say this to say to anyone that decides that you want to get involved, your community does have to know you. So for me, to meet the little old widow or widower down the street that I knew were there by themselves. So whenever I was going grocery shopping or something, I could say, hey, I'm going grocery shopping. Do you need anything? Or, I'm just checking on you. And even younger people, because I mean, today we're so isolated. We live in our own little silos. And I wouldn't have known a lot of my neighbors even had I not gotten out, because I mean, we drive past and we wave, but actually gotten a chance to know them, and them, gotten a chance to know who I was. And so for me, I felt like that was a win, even if I hadn't gotten elected. But, I did get elected. And so even with that, we don't just stop because we're in. Our work just begins, when we get in there.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
No.
I love that you say that, because I tell people all the time, I want to win. I intend to win this primary and then go on to win the general. But if my community feels more connected with the democratic process, we've won. That's what this is all about. It's an honor to run in the district that I grew up in. It was a district that I was harmed in, but they still invested in me. Every 6 months in CPS, I would get a clothes voucher. That was paid by the Williamson County taxpayers. They invested in me. How can I not work to be a return on their investment? Just as you mentioned, I check on my neighbors. I'm knocking on doors and people are saying, oh, like, we've heard about you. When I tell people and people find out there's a young Black woman who grew up in this district that's running, you see them light up. Folks that I wouldn't even expect to be excited about my run. I was knocking on a door a couple weekends ago, and I said, I went to Gaddis Elementary right down the street. She says, oh, I taught at Gaddis. And come to find out, she was there when I was being taught there. That's what this is about. To sit across from a city council member and tell her, that I was at this shelter in the area, and to find out her family donated blankets, handmade blankets. And we did the math, and I got one of her blankets. That's what it means to give back to your community and to be a return on the investment and to continue the work. It really is an honor to run in Williamson County. I couldn't imagine running anywhere else. In fact, I was asked to consider running somewhere else, and I said, no, this is my community. I could have never returned after I graduated college, but I knew that I wanted to give back, no matter how traumatic it's been being back.
Okay, so I know that running is it's not only a lot of your time, but it costs to be able to get out and about. So would you please tell everyone how they can support you?
Yes. So my handle on all social media platforms is Angel for Texas, Angel, ANGEL, Texas. You can donate at angelfortexas.com. If you can't vote for me, you can still get involved. So on my website, there's a place where you can sign up to volunteer. We're going to be doing virtual phone banking, so you can help call voters and get the word out. As the council member mentioned, it is expensive to run. That's why it's hard for working class Texans to run for office. So any contribution helps. $5, $10, $25 would be greatly appreciated. In fact, $25 helps me knock on 625 doors and send mailers out. Reach out to me. I'd love to talk to folks. It's really important to me to be accessible to the voters in our broader community.
Thank you so much. And any parting words that you'd like to talk to a young person that's thinking about getting into politics, a young person that's struggling right now in the system?
Well, first off, you're so much better than the worst thing that you've ever done. Don't let tomorrow dictate what you do today. And get out and let your voice be heard. You deserve to have a future and to see a future where you, your family can thrive. Get out and vote. And if you can't vote, help register folks to vote. Help educate folks on who's on the ballot and what's on the ballot. There's so much at risk with this upcoming election. And I and other electeds, we need you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast, and I wish you much success. And I know you're going to get it.
Thank you.
Yes, you definitely deserve to be in that seat, and we definitely need people like you in the seat. So
Thank you. Thank you for having me.